These are Russian soldiers. They're protesting against the Russian government because they haven't been paid what they were promised for fighting this war. This is a symptom of a bigger problem that Vladimir Putin is facing. Russia's economy is dying, and it's all because of the war that Putin started. The famous saying is true: no one wins in a war. Just because Europe is struggling, that doesn't mean Russia is any better off. In fact, as you will soon see, Russia might be very close to collapsing in on itself, and it's all playing out right in front of us. Sanctions are pushing the Russian economy down a dangerous path, and the invasion is costing Russia its entire future. According to Russia's own central bank, Russia is set for the deepest recession of any large economy this year. So in today's video, let's go over how bad of a situation the Russian economy is facing, and how long can Putin afford to continue his senseless invasion?
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима.
After months of preparations, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has launched a major military operation against Ukraine. Speaking on national television, Mr. Putin urged Ukrainian troops to lay down their arms and go home.
We can see the Ukrainian forces exerting a very comprehensive push across the whole territory.
Ukraine's army has said it made major gains around the port city of Kherson following Russia's announcement that its troops were withdrawing from the area.
Jubilation in the streets as Ukrainian soldiers retook the strategic city of Kherson after Russian forces retreated.
First, let me address the elephant in the comments. I know everyone predicted that Russia's economy would collapse when sanctions were first announced. But looking back, it didn't. So what happened there? Well, Russia's economy did hurt initially from sanctions, but it had its oil and gas industry to depend upon to make up for any loss. We'll go into more detail about this soon, but as oil prices rose, Russia made more money, and the economy survived because of that. But now oil prices are slowly coming down, and other countries are getting less dependent on Russian oil, so things are not looking good for the Russian economy. Let's get into what problems it's facing. But first, let's back up a little bit and start from the beginning. As soon as Putin launched his invasion in Ukraine, Russia was hit with sanction packages that were probably quicker and heavier than anyone expected. Overnight, Russia was cut off from the global economy, and foreign businesses left the country, leaving behind billions of dollars in investments, all to show their protest against the war. Globalization, the thing that helped every country get wealthier and wealthier, was now being used against Russia because it threatened world peace. We were reminded that no matter how dependent countries are on each other, it could all go away in the blink of an eye. Or at least, that's what the media made it out to be. It was predicted that Russia would lose 15% of its economic output in just 1 year because of these strict sanctions. The sanctions included a freeze on Russia's foreign reserves, restrictions on critical supplies it got from trade, blocking oligarchs' access to the world, and much more. As bad as all that sounds, things didn't quite work out as predicted, at least when looking from the outside. The Russian ruble dropped at the beginning of the war, but it quickly recovered and climbed higher than the pre-war level. The 15% drop in the Russian economy was revised to 7%, then 5%, then 4%. And instead of the Russian economy crashing, the news cycle was overtaken by European nations' economies struggling because of countermeasures taken by Russia. So, just to recap, Russia launched a war. Other superpowers didn't want to get involved directly and risk nuclear escalation, so they sanctioned Russia into oblivion. And the countries that ended up struggling from the sanctions were the ones imposing the sanctions. This sounds like a meme. Well, looks like things didn't go as planned, right? Not exactly. Let me explain. Before that, I want to thank today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Various small websites and apps are tracking everything you do. Then they sell your data to the highest bidder. So this data can end up in the hands of unsavory buyers. This is where today's sponsor, Atlas VPN, can protect you. Atlas will keep your IP address and search history private, so your data doesn't end up in the wrong hands. On top of this, you can enjoy other benefits like watching region-locked content on streaming sites, and actually save money on your flights and vacations if you search from other countries. Best of all, right now, Atlas VPN is running a Steel Black Friday deal. It means you can get a 3-year subscription for just $170 a month, and 6 months for free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Just click the link in the description.
Massive and targeted sanctions. We will target strategic sectors of the Russian economy by blocking their access to technologies and markets that are key for Russia.
Sixth package of sanctions against Moscow over its war on Ukraine and called for a phased embargo of Russian oil imports by the end of the year.
The Biden administration's plans for sanctioning Russia are taking shape. U.S. institutions would be prohibited from dealing with major Russian banks and state companies.
This was a direct and debilitating hit on the Russian economy. The removal of Russian banks from the SWIFT financial network and the sanctioning of the Russian central bank are unprecedented in their impact, and they're sending Russia back to the 20th century in terms of its financial standing.
Yeah, quite right. The ruble has sunk to another record low.
His announcement last week sparked an exodus of Russians fleeing across the border into Georgia, Finland, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and elsewhere to avoid being conscripted.
You see, it would be unfair to say the sanctions didn't work. Russia has no access to microchips, which severely hinders its capability to fight a modern war. Its car industry is dead because of the sanctions. The aviation industry was pushed back decades because important equipment are not arriving from Europe and the US. Inflation is currently at 12% in Russia because of the shortages in essential goods, all while the central bank is cutting interest rates to fight off the recession. So if everything is going down the gutters, how is Russia continuing the war? Well, oil and gas. Since 2017, Russia has been building its war chest to prepare for a situation like this. On top of that, as soon as the invasion was launched, oil prices shot up to the highest level this year, and they have stayed relatively high for a good part of the year. This helped Russia generate a record amount of revenue and keep funding its economy and the war. Record oil prices and the inelasticity of oil demand helped offset a lot of the drag down from the sanctions. Russia made $100 billion from fuel exports in the first 100 days after the invasion, which was up 60% from the same time in the previous year. And it made more money while exporting less oil, all thanks to higher prices. Europe was one of Russia's biggest customers, and has been slow to stop their imports, as it's a necessary resource and hard to replace quickly. Whatever revenue Russia lost from the United States was easily made up by increased purchases from India and China, but, at discounted prices. India and China realized that Russia needed to sell oil, and they took advantage of the situation to get it at 30% cheaper than market prices. Russia didn't mind the discount because oil prices were much higher than this time last year, so they can afford to give a little discount on an already raised price. But as the panic around oil demand slowly goes down, the prices are more likely to come down, given that OPEC doesn't help Russia too by continuing to cut supply. As this happens, Russia's revenue will also slow down, hurting the economy even more. We are already seeing signs of this happening. As exports to the EU fell, it was assumed that India and China would make up this demand. But as Russia is trying to decrease the discounts on prices, the demand from China and India is also decreasing. Europe is planning to stop buying Russian oil in December, which would be a huge dent in Russian fuel revenues. It's also predicted that Russia will likely run out of its reserves by the end of 2023, making it even harder to fund a war. That's why Western countries are also trying to introduce a price cap on Russian oil, so that Russia doesn't continue benefiting from high oil prices, and countries that need Russian oil can continue to get it. Details of this price cap are not yet set, but one likely scenario to convince other countries is, well, it's kind of aggressive. Let me explain. how can you convince countries like India or China to follow price caps set by Western nations? It's a bit hard, so one solution is threatening the country with sanctions if they don't follow these price caps, which is unlikely to help any of your relationships. So it's been reported that Biden isn't really considering this approach. Another strategy being considered is to apply an oil price cap using insurance companies, which are crucial to the shipping industry. Most of the oil around the world is shipped through the oceans, and these ships need insurance to set sail. It's a law, and it's required by ports if you want to dock. Around 90% of the insurance market is controlled by Europe and the USA. This gives them huge leverage. So to enforce a price cap, insurance companies would only insure a ship if the price of the oil on board doesn't exceed a price cap, which means if Russia wants to sell the oil, it needs to follow the price cap, which will reduce their top-line revenue. Other than oil, gas is also a big part of Russia's revenue stream. Gas is mainly transported through pipelines, which takes decades to construct. So as European countries cut their gas purchases from Russia, it's getting harder for Russia to find new buyers. And it's near impossible to supply gas at scale without building the infrastructure first. If Europe ever gets to a point where it doesn't need Russian gas, the consequences of this can be disastrous for Russia. While Russia is slowly losing its ability to fund the war, Putin's decisions are also killing any hope of a better future for the Russian economy and its people. Before that, real quick, I have a small request. Making videos about war is a risky move on YouTube. The algorithms sometimes don't like promoting controversial stuff. So if you can just take a quick pause and hit that like button on this video, it helps me out tremendously. Thank you.
Необходимо поддержать предложение Министерства обороны и Генерального штаба о проведении в Российской Федерации частичной мобилизации.
At Russia's borders, Vladimir Putin's comeuppance, the lifeblood of his war in Ukraine, military-age men fleeing fears of conscription.
Those cars are filled with fighting-age men trying to leave Russia before they get drafted.
Russians are now fleeing to avoid Vladimir Putin's military draft, with 2 men even arriving in Alaska and requesting asylum.
On September 21st, 2022, Putin announced a partial mobilization of men in Russia, ordering 300,000 men to join the war in Ukraine. Following this announcement, many citizens have attempted to flee the country by car, train, and plane to Russia's neighboring nations. Long lines of traffic have been seen near Russia's borders with multiple neighboring countries, including Georgia, which saw a nearly 10-mile buildup of vehicles. According to Bloomberg, more than 360,000 men left the country following the announcement, and that's on top of the more than 300,000 that have already left the country after the invasion started. The total number of people that have left is hard to say, but estimates range upwards of around 1 million. These are able-bodied, working-age men, leaving a country that's already struggling with its economy. These are the exact kind of workers an economy needs to grow and get back on track. The long-term effects of this kind of exodus are drastic. When you couple in the exodus of men leaving the country to fight in Ukraine and possibly die, the majority of Russia's most productive population is not producing for the economy. Russia has no plan to fill this labor shortage in the economy, and companies are shutting down because they don't have enough manpower to stay open. Imagine being a Russian factory owner today who can't produce your goods, for which you have an excellent market, as so many Western companies have left Russia or stopped exporting to it because of a lack of manpower. Imagine being an IT firm losing engineers with no new ones in sight, or a food distribution firm losing truck drivers. Imagine being a Russian citizen unable to get the goods or services you need. This is the kind of thing that forces citizens to turn on their government.